Good morning. I'm joined today by my parliamentary assistant, Michael Parsa, and my other parliamentary assistant, Will Balma, could not join us today. I'm pleased to be here to release the 2021-2022 first quarter finances. Our government was elected with a mandate to be responsible managers, which is why transparency and accountability is so important to all Ontarians and to us. In fact, we haven't missed a quarterly financial update since being elected, and that hasn't always been the case for Ontario in the previous administration. Our commitment to transparency and accountability has not wavered during COVID-19, even though financial and economic forecasting has been more difficult than ever. In fact, as a longtime business person and former head of a credit rating agency, I can confidently say there has never been a period where it has been more difficult for governments to plan and to budget. We've had recessions before, but never have we had such a sudden and substantive contraction in our economy and the economic activity as we have faced through this COVID-19 pandemic. We've battled new viruses before, but not in living memory have we had to mobilize our entire healthcare system so rapidly in response to this global pandemic, and maintain that response for as long as new variants of concern drive resurging waves of the virus. We've supported people and job creators through tough economic times before, but never have we had to muster the fiscal firepower among all levels of government the way we've had to do over the last 18 months. Despite the uncertainty, Ontario has persisted in our commitment to plan responsibly, along with continuing our regular, transparent updates to those plans based on the best information available at the time. And so we are here again today with another update. Malgré l'incertitude, nous avons maintenu notre engagement de planifier de façon responsable et nous avons mis à jour ces plans régulièrement et de façon transparente en tenant compte des meilleurs renseignements que nous avons à ce moment. Et nous voici, aujourd'hui, avec une autre mise à jour. Before getting to the numbers, I'll take a moment to recap Ontario's prudent approach to pandemic budgeting. Since day one, the government's response to COVID-19 has been supported by Ontario's action plan, a flexible and clear framework to protect people and jobs. This was important for two reasons. First, this approach ensured transparency and accountability even amidst the significant economic uncertainty caused by the pandemic. As I've already highlighted, our government was elected to restore accountability and trust in public finances. And this sets us apart from other governments in terms of the importance of living up to the mandate entrusted to us by the people of Ontario. Ontario led the country by being the first jurisdiction in Canada to release a fiscal plan that reflected the potential impacts of COVID-19, and we did that in March of 2020. Not providing regular and timely updates was never an option that we considered. Now, that's not a criticism against other Canadian governments who chose a different route, given the uncertainty. It's simply a recognition of our unique and specific mandate to be transparent and accountable to the people of Ontario. And so the people of Ontario have continued to receive regular updates based on the latest information available, including this update, which is the 6th since the beginning of the pandemic. The second reason this approach was important is that it made good on the Premier's commitment to make every necessary resource available to respond to the pandemic. In the early days, no one could predict exactly how COVID-19 would unfold. But what was certain, however, was that fighting the virus would require additional investments in healthcare, in economic support, and in recovery initiatives. Recognizing that provincial governments do not have access to unlimited resources, Ontario's action plan directed those investments where they are needed the most, while setting aside further funding in targeted contingencies to be directed at urgently evolving needs, including vaccine distribution, and for support for small businesses. To be frank, we knew our frontline healthcare workers would face obstacles as they worked to stop the spread and keep us safe. We were determined from day one to ensure a lack of resources would never be one of those obstacles, and it never was. In fact, as I reported in the budget last March, we made available $16.3 billion to protect people's health during the pandemic. But that didn't stop us about thinking about the future. In fact, even amidst the pandemic, we made a record investment to make good on our commitment to fix the long-term care system in Ontario once and for all, and make our province the leader in Canada in terms of the quality of care for our loved ones and the care that they receive. Now, while the pandemic isn't over, the approach is paying off, and it will continue. The government remains unwavering in its commitment to protect people's health and people's jobs, which is why we will continue to maintain the flexible financial support to support Ontario's recovery and combat the pandemic. Today, we are reporting that the economy is expected to grow faster in 2021 compared to when the budget was released. Now, this is good news. And along with recent one-time federal transfers, it's why the revenue forecasted by your government is forecasted to go up in 2022 by $2.9 billion higher than originally projected in the budget I tabled last March. Under normal circumstances and all other factors remaining the same, higher than projected revenue would directly reduce the deficit. However, there remains continued uncertainty about variants of concern, the risk of surges and future waves, and the need to target future investments to spur economic recovery. As a result, the government is taking the prudent step of setting aside $2.2 billion of this revenue for the time-limited COVID-19 fund. This will ensure we maintain the flexibility necessary given the ongoing uncertainty related to the pandemic and the future pace of economic recovery. Ainsi, nous maintenons la souplesse nécessaire, étant donné l'incertitude qui continue de régner par rapport à la pandémie et au rythme de la reprise économique à venir. And it gives me confidence, as the province's treasurer, that we will continue to have available every necessary resource to protect people's health and to protect the jobs. Now, the remaining increase in projected revenue will improve Ontario's deficit projection, a modest yet important sign that the fiscal recovery is underway. Overall, the government is projecting a deficit of $32.4 billion in 2021-22, an improvement of nearly $700 million since the spring budget. And as I've said many times before, Ontario's fiscal recovery will be driven by economic growth. And the continued recovery in employment and the modest deficit improvement projected today are evidence of that. But let me be clear, the job is not fully done. The importance of economic growth to ensuring a sustainable fiscal position was recently highlighted in a report from the C.D. Howe Institute. It's just one more reason our government is going to keep working to make Ontario the best place in the world to do business. And as sure as I'm standing here, our pro-growth plan will ensure people and employers of the province benefit from jobs, prosperity, and opportunity. The next step in our plan will be outlined in the 2021 Economic Outlook and Fiscal Review, or as we call it, the Fall Economic Statement, to be released by November 15, 2021. Now, before I take questions, I'd just like to say a few words about our Premier Bill Davis, who recently passed away. I want to convey on behalf of our government and on behalf of myself and my family our condolences to the Davis family. You know, all people who put their hand up for public service, whether municipal, provincial, or federal, across all stripes, I think we all go in trying to make the city, our province, our country, a better place than what we found. And I think I can speak on behalf of all Ontarians, how grateful we are to Premier Davis, who his years of public service made Ontario a better place. So on behalf of all Ontarians, I want to thank his service, and I again want to express my sympathies to his family. And with that, I'd be happy to take some questions.
Okay, thank you, Minister. We'll go to the phone line for questions. One question and one follow-up, please. Go ahead.
First question from Patrick Bethlenfalvy at Globe and Mail.
Good morning, Minister. Thanks for taking the time. I'm wondering on the time-limited COVID fund, $2.2 billion. What do you expect to spend that on, and is it sort of essentially a COVID contingency fund, and that could just go to reduce the deficit if expenses don't materialize?
Yeah, thank you, and a very good question, Patrick. What's really important for a finance minister and treasurer of the province to make sure that the resources are available for our ministers, our government, our premier to be able to continue to do what it takes to protect people's health and the economy. So as we've demonstrated and we announced in the budget some $51 billion of supports over 4 years to protect people's health and protect their jobs. So this is an additional $2.2 billion that would be, specifically to your question, what's it going to be used for? It'll be those things, protecting people's health and protecting the economy. What's clear to, I think, everybody is the job's not done. The pandemic, the virus has not been completely defeated. There's more work to do. And the variants of concern, the Delta variant is very real. We're seeing it across the world where places like Australia and parts of Australia are in their 6th lockdown. Parts of Europe have added additional measures like face masking, which we continue to do here in Ontario. We've seen spikes across the U.S. in terms of the Delta variant. So we have to continue to be vigilant. We have to continue to mask. As I walked in to Queen's Park, you get asked 7 questions, so you get screened. Until you get to the podium, we're masked, physically distanced. We got to keep our guard up. And as finance minister, I want to make sure the resources continue to be there so that we can combat, whether it's health-related, Patrick, or economic-related, that we have the resources to combat what's around the corner.
I guess as my follow-up, just to clarify, but those funds have not been allocated at those points. Those are contingent on events and things occurring that you then might spend that $2.2 billion, as events unfold. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So for example, the way I try to think about it is that I'm not responsible for the fire trucks or putting out the fire, but I am responsible for making sure we have enough water. But I don't know where the fires will be. When you start a fiscal year, we're 3 months into the fiscal year. That's what we're reporting out on. There's still 9 months in the fiscal year, and of course, the variant doesn't respect our time frame. So we have to make sure, and this government and this minister has to make sure that we have the resources, and I can't predict everywhere that'll be needed. So I just want to make sure that we have those resources so they can be allocated when and if they're needed.
Next question.
From Colin DeMello at CTV News.
Hi, good morning, Minister. You've often talked about the money that the government has set aside for contingency funds, et cetera, but we learned through the Financial Accountability Officer that $10.3 billion of budgeted funds were not actually spent in the last fiscal year. Could you address that specifically? Why was that $10.3 billion left unspent by the end of the 2020-2021 year?
Well, thanks, Colin, for that question. And just to be clear, first off, I always thank the Financial Accountability Officer for the work that they do. It's so important, as part, as I said in my remarks, the transparency and accountability. Having others have a chance to look at the numbers and report out on that, that's an important part of a good functioning government and good for democracy. Now, to be clear, the Financial Accountability Officer's numbers are based on a point in time back in April, and they're not the final figures. The final figures, which the Auditor General signs off on, will come out in September. Those will be the definitive numbers, and the Financial Accountability Officer acknowledges that. And so we'll have a lot more to say about that. What is clear, though, and he mentions that the Health Fund and the Support for People in Jobs Fund were completely spent. Revenues, he's predicting will be up. We'll see the final numbers. I've seen other provinces who have put their numbers out. They've seen increased revenues, so we'll see what our numbers look like in September. And in terms of the resources available, Colin, I'll just go back to what I just said. My job is to make sure that there's enough water, and if all the water is needed, then good. We've been there, but we'll have to see for the actual numbers when they come out in September. And let me say one final thing, excuse me, about accountability and trust. The last three public accounts, so this is the audited books that we're going to see and the Auditor General has to sign off on. Our last three audited books, the Auditor General gave us a clean opinion. And that wasn't the case with the previous government. So I believe very strongly in accountability and transparency, and I will see the books when they come out in September, and myself and the President of the Treasury Board will be right back here, and we'll be able to answer your questions about that with the real numbers at that point, the specific numbers in September.
Follow-up, Colin?
Thank you. While revenues are up, a lot of businesses are still living under, some kind of a capacity limit, which is obviously restricting their ability to make, their pre-pandemic level incomes. While the Chief Medical Officer of Health says, it could be up to 10 days before those capacity limits are increased, we're hearing from the Science Advisory Table, they might not sign off on lifting those capacity limits just yet. There have been calls for you to offer a third round of support to small businesses in terms of a one-time payment or one-time grant. Is your government going to use that $2.2 billion as an example to provide those businesses with a third round of grants to get through the last set of capacity limits?
So first off, I just want to acknowledge, because I've been around this province mainly by Zoom, but in person where I can, and our businesses, have clearly taken it on the chin through the previous lockdowns, and so we've been there to support them, and I'll get into that in a second. But I will say this also, what I'm hearing, Colin, is that customer demand has really come back in most sectors robustly. That's why in the numbers that I've tabled today that we've increased the economic output projection from 4% when I tabled the budget in March to 5%. So that's telling me that economic activity has increased, and that's based on private sector forecasts. Let me tell you this as well, as what I hear is there's more demand than workers. So businesses have a challenge to find workers. So that's why I think in the budget, putting so much, over $600 million back in March for retraining, for reskilling, our task force to get more women into the economy, more into the skilled trades, more support for entrepreneurs continues to be the right call. Let me talk about the supports. Over $3 billion, or roughly $3 billion of business supports has gone out. Obviously, property and electricity costs have been subsidized, and that's in this report as well. So we've done a number of things, including the federal government, which are continuing their supports until September. We do have the tourism and travel grant, which is helping also the sector which has been really hit hard, which is the tourism sector. But let me tell you, we will continue to monitor the situation. There's a lot of uncertainty right now, Colin, with the Delta variant and potentially other variants of concern. Who knows what's around the corner? But one thing I know that everyone probably can agree on is we don't want a fourth lockdown. So we're going to do everything we can from a health perspective to continue to promote vaccinations, to continue to promote measures such as masking and distancing, particularly while inside, and all the other types of things that we can do to get those vaccination rates up. 81% is good first dose, 72% second dose, but still more to do there. So very encouraged, but we can't let our guard down.
Next question.
From Jessica Smith at Queen's Park Briefing.
Hi, thanks so much for taking my question. I'd like to ask you about how the health situation impacts the economic one. The potential severity of a Delta-driven fourth wave seems to become an increasingly clear threat very recently. So what would the economic consequences of a severe fourth wave and a fourth lockdown be? And is any of that anticipated in the economic forecast this document is based on?
So Jessica, thank you. Very, very important questions. One thing I've learned over 35 years in business and in the private sector and now in the public sector is you're always dealing with uncertainty. Uncertainty on economic conditions, uncertainty in terms of our competitive position, uncertainty on so many levels. And this is a significantly one of those periods where there's really a lot of uncertainty. Now, the first quarter that we're talking about today, we've increased the economic forecast based on private forecasters, but what goes up could go down. And what I'm saying here is that the measures that we're taking to protect people's health and to protect their jobs, to make sure, as we said today in the remarks, that we're putting aside another $2.2 billion to make sure that we have the resources available to deal with what's around the corner. That's the world that we live in. And one thing that our government is very focused on is making sure that we provide solid, responsible, and transparent government to the people of Ontario, given those uncertainties. So I don't know, I'm not going to speculate what's around the corner economically. I think, knock on wood, it's always better that the economic activity is up versus down, but not sure what's around the corner. We'll continue to monitor it. And so that's the perspective that we have to take. Be prudent with the resources and put in place the conditions so that when the economy can grow, when we can reopen more safely, we'll have our children back to school. These are things that we have to monitor very closely and continue to put in place, as the Premier has done, leading, I think, as we did before the pandemic in job creation, putting in the conditions to have good, robust growth and, frankly, lead the country in job growth.
Follow-up, Jess?
Yeah, thanks. Given the potential economic consequences of a forced lockdown, what is your view of using proof of vaccination or some kind of domestic vaccine passport or similar thing to avoid one becoming necessary?
Well, I'm very pleased to see the federal government stepping up to do what they can only do, is provide a national standard for travel. You know, many of the virus didn't swim here. It came through our borders, so we have to continue to be very vigilant. That's a federal responsibility. So I'm encouraged that the federal government is looking at this, that they've been talking to the premiers. Our premier has been advocating for those national standards so that we don't have a fragmented system. I think what we can do provincially is continue, as I said, to be vigilant about the variants of concern, the Delta variant specifically, continue to push the vaccination rates as much as we can. I'm encouraged that people are continuing to get their first dose. We're seeing the second doses come up quite well as well. The Chief Medical Officer of Health has been very clear that, and as our Minister of Health has been, that vaccination remains a priority. And as our Minister of Health has pointed out, I have on my phone my vaccine certificate. I have it in paper as well, and so I can produce that whenever needed. But priority number one is to make sure that we can stay vigilant so that when we can reopen the economy fully, and we're doing pretty well with 50%, but you're seeing the case numbers, not just here in Ontario, across Canada, across the world, increase, and so we have to remain vigilant.
Okay, Minister, I don't believe there's any more questions.
All right, thank you for everyone's time, and please stay safe and enjoy the summer. Thank you very much.